The history of Greece is lost in the ages. Struck by countless cataclysms, the Greeks were reborn time and time again, rising like the phoenix from its ashes. The relentless Greek spirit, embodied in their gods who encapsulate the richness of life, nurtured their boundless imagination and explorative spirit. A testament to this is the Greek language, their most powerful creation, the mind's most useful tool, the algorithm for Greek success. Its composite and thus expansive structure allowed Greeks to think freely and unleash the genius of man like it has never been done before. It enabled them to invent and articulate complicated concepts of philosophy, science, poetry, politics, and love. In ancient Greek, the word logos embodies both speech and reason, reflecting not a linguistic limitation, but an appreciation for reason as an inherent part of human activity. This distinctive attribute was what set the Greeks apart from the barbarians. Dialogue is the logos blessed by Dias, also known as Zeus. For the Greeks, it was seen as a superior form of communication and a conduit for divine wisdom. Between 1000 and 700 BC, Greece experienced a dark age, marked by a significant decline that resulted in the loss of their written language. Fortunately, the Greeks' rich oral tradition remained intact. Homer, the renowned bard, breathed new life into Greek literature, setting the foundation for their cultural revival. And surely enough, the phoenix was reborn, and the Greeks were able to rebuild their alphabet. Greek mariners, armed with this renewed spirit, once again spread across the Mediterranean, establishing new colonies, each carrying the sacred flame of their homeland. Athens, the birthplace of Plato, experienced a renaissance in craftsmanship and manufacturing. These advancements rapidly spread to Greek colonies, transforming Ionia into the heart of Greek industry. This industrial revolution coincided with a cultural renaissance. Long-standing oral traditions were written down, culminating in the widespread acceptance of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, epics that celebrated the Greek genius of city-building and exploration. This literary revival gave birth to new poetic forms and paved the way for the development of Greek tragedy, which delved into the human experience, exploring raw emotions, moral and philosophical dilemmas, reflecting contemporary social issues. Yet, the true hallmark of Greek civilization was not commerce and industry, nor even epic poetry. It was the birth of science. It was in the Greek colonies of Ionia that the first inklings of scientific discovery emerged. The Ionian proto-scientists, physicists as they were called, were pioneers, recognizing the interrelatedness of the laws governing both mind and nature as the proper subject of scientific inquiry. One of the most influential thinkers was Thales of Miletus, who famously declared, "All is water." Thales recognized that a common substance under the same natural laws could manifest itself in various states of matter. He was the first to predict and explain solar eclipses, transforming them from mystical occurrences into understood phenomena. Thales was one of the great thinkers of ancient Greece, known as the Seven Sages. Perhaps the most consequential among them was Solon, the founding father of Athens as we know it today. In 594 BC, he emerged as a reformer amid a crisis-ridden Athens, implementing the first written laws based on a republican conception of the city-state. He outlawed the sale of free men to slavery for their debts and advocated for craftsmanship and industry, viewing them as the keystones for Athenian greatness. While Solon was a visionary, he was no populist. He rejected the demands for redistribution of the aristocracy's landholdings, believing that Athens needed a political elite that could train and educate leadership for the coming generations. His constitution was the first to embody the notion that the good of the individual citizen and that of all the societal classes could only be achieved through economic growth and a culture shared by all. And while a famous lawgiver, Solon understood that a city's civility was more deeply rooted in its social norms and ethics rather than in its laws. In the other side of the known world, Mesopotamia languished under the oppressive rule of the Babylonian Empire. Central to this tyranny was the cult of Marduk, a priesthood which claimed divine authority to enslave and tax the populace. At the heart of the empire in Babylon, the Temple of Marduk presided over a web of tax-collecting temples spread across modern-day Middle East to Egypt and the Fertile Crescent. Under this theocratic rule, Babylonians, disparagingly referred to as the black-headed ones, were barely more than slaves to the temple, their lands and labor largely appropriated. Besides their iron grip on the empire's economy, this oppressive regime also dictated the empire's foreign and military policy through the high priest's oracles, whose prophetic decrees were deemed irrefutable. No Babylonian king made war or peace without first consulting the oracles of the Marduk temple. Observing the vibrant trading and manufacturing, progressive Greek city-states, the Marduk priesthood perceived a threat in this nascent power of freedom and democracy. Over centuries, their policies of extreme taxation and forced regression had eroded their military prowess. Faced with this vulnerability, the Marduk priesthood sought a surrogate to carry out their belligerent ambitions. Their choice fell upon Cyrus, the then king of a relatively insignificant Persian kingdom. Under the sponsorship of Marduk, Cyrus was groomed to rise from a ruler of a minor kingdom to a conqueror of lands stretching from the Mediterranean to the Himalayas. Their first target was the prosperous kingdom of Lydia under King Croesus, followed swiftly by the Ionian Greek cities. By 546 BC, the entire eastern Mediterranean coast had fallen under the Persian dominion. The Babylonian armies soon found their match in the Greek world. Skilled manipulators of public opinion through prophecies and divine dictates, the Marduk priests enlisted the services of the famed Oracle of Apollo. Located in the city of Delphi on mainland Greece, the oracle was at the center of a network of temples which worshipped the god Apollo and spanned across the Greek world. Mirroring the temple of Marduk, these priests formed and propagated the Apollo cult, not as a religious initiative, but as an instrument for political control, an intelligence operation maintaining the status quo of the oligarchy. Its information and knowledge was limitless and was passed on as secret from generation to generation of priests. These temples of Apollo were also the wealthiest banking hubs in the Mediterranean by profiting from the prophecies they sold to kings and commoners, accepting deposits under the protection of the god, and facilitating loans as deemed necessary by the Persian interests. When the Greek city-states sent forces to support the Ionian cities against Cyrus, the Oracle of Delphi condemned them, calling for retreat. After a few skirmishes, the Ionian cities yielded to the oracle's command, submitting to Persia. Following these conquests, Cyrus was tasked with subduing the Babylonian king Nabonidus, who dared challenge the authority of the Marduk priests. Cyrus, backed by the priesthood, marched into Babylon, dethroning Nabonidus and marking the end of the Babylonian Empire's continuous reign of 1,500 years. With Ionia's fall, Persia gained control over the last Asian minor mercantile centers. The navies of both Ionia and Phoenicia to the south were now under its control. However, by 499 BC, anti-Persian forces rallied the Ionian city-states against King Darius, Cyrus's successor. Aristagoras of Miletus, the rebellion's leader, sought support from Greece. His pleas for assistance found favor in the city of Eretria and Athens, which dispatched ships and heavily armed hoplites to aid the rebellion. Despite the Delphi oracle's condemnation, the Ionian city-states scored victories, even capturing the Lydian capital, Sardis. However, the revolt was eventually crushed, and the city of Miletus was razed, The aftermath was brutal. The city's men were slaughtered and the women and children enslaved. Shaken by the tenacity of the Greek city-states, the Marduk priesthood acknowledged the danger they posed. Thus, in the decade preceding the 5th century BC, the Persian Empire launched an attack on Greece. With a force of 40,000, including the fearsome 10,000 immortals, they sought to punish the Greeks for the Ionian revolt. After having decimated Eretria, the Persians set their sights on Athens. However, as they set foot on the shores of Marathon, they were met with a resolute Athenian force. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Greeks emerged victorious, a resounding defeat that echoed through the heart of the Persian Empire. 10 years later, the Persians, under the watchful eyes of their despotic ruler Xerxes, mounted a second expedition with the largest army the world had ever seen. Their goal was clear: to bring the independent Greek city-states under their dominion. At the narrow passage of Thermopylae, a small force of Spartans made a legendary stand, their heroic resistance becoming a beacon of Greek resilience. As the formidable Persian force surged forth, swallowing Greek city-states in its relentless tide, the desperate Athenians dispatched an envoy to the oracle for guidance, as tradition dictated in times of crisis. Remarkably untouched by Persian onslaught, the oracle conveyed a prophecy that predicted Athenian defeat and urged them to submit to the Persian Empire, claiming that it was a force destined to unite the world and bring peace. However, one man would not accept such a defeatist sentiment. Undeterred by the prophetic doom, Themistocles, an audacious Athenian general and a veteran of the Battle of Marathon, remained steadfast. After Marathon, he had foreseen the return of the Persians with a force mightier than before. And when Athens discovered an expansive silver deposit, Themistocles, armed with his foresight and political acumen, managed to persuade his fellow Athenians to use this newfound wealth to construct a formidable navy rather than distribute it amongst the populace. Themistocles had foreseen a pessimistic oracle response and had preemptively planned an audacious reaction that had never been witnessed before. He intercepted the Athenian delegation returning with the prophecy and demanded a renewed, more optimistic divination. Determined to spare his people from Persian subjugation, Themistocles embarked on a daring strategy. Upon returning to Athens, he cunningly persuaded the citizenry to abandon their beloved city and seek refuge on the nearby island of Salamis. With the Athenian populace secure on Salamis, Themistocles assembled a coalition of Greek city-state navies to confront the Persian fleet in the narrow straits between Athens and Salamis. When the Persian forces descended upon Athens, they wrought destruction upon the city, reducing even the sacred temples to rubble. From their haven on Salamis, the Athenians could only watch helplessly as their city burned, the jewel of their civilization consumed by flames. All the while, the vast Persian navy, outnumbering the Greeks 4-1, amassed nearby. The pivotal battle for the fate of Europe and Western civilization was on the horizon. The technologically superior Greek navy, consisting of lean and innovative battleships, was manned by well-trained, free Greek citizens. Using their superior tactics, agility and speed, the Greeks outmaneuvered and rammed the Persian ships one after the other. The Persian armada, once thought invincible, crumbled under the relentless assault. Xerxes, the once overconfident ruler, was forced to witness the destruction of his precious fleet from a nearby hill, tearing at his garments in utter frustration and disbelief. Themistocles' audacious strategy had paid off. The Greek navy had turned the tide, breathing new life into the Western civilization and defying the prophecy of their defeat. Xerxes attempted to reorganize his army, but was again defeated by the Greeks at the Battle of Plataea and Mycale. No Persian army would again set foot in Greece. Following their victorious stand, the Greeks seized the initiative. For the first time in their history, Athens and Sparta, the two titans of Greece, found themselves united in an alliance known as the Delian League. The partnership encompassed almost all Greek city-states, numbering more than 200. They all agreed to pool their wealth into a common treasury situated on the sacred island of Delos. This repository represented not only their joint interest and loyalty, but also serving as a currency reserve that instilled stability and confidence in their economies. By fostering an environment of economic assurance, they established a credit system that stimulated trade and amplified economic activity. The Greeks realized that united they could accomplish any task whatsoever. In a grand assembly of the Greeks, Herodotus, revered as the first official historian, recounts a moment of profound significance. He narrates how Eurybiades, the Spartan king, declared that the Greeks had driven the Persian menace from Europe's soil, and it was their duty to protect it. This served as an emblematic seal, branding the Greeks as the guardians of Europe for millennia to come. The first goal of the alliance was to liberate Egypt from Persian rule, a country they respected for its lengthy history, unique traditions, and spiritual significance. Their end goal was eliminating the Persian threat for good. However, the Persians, recognizing the superior force of the united Greek citizen hoplites, shifted to more subtle, divisive tactics and exploited the Greek tendency for civil war. Athenian leader Pericles sought a unified Greece under Athenian rule, relocating the joint treasury of Delos to Athens, which was fiercely resisted by independent city-states, particularly Sparta. As tensions rose, Sparta consulted the Oracle of Delphi, which endorsed war against Athens, and thus a devastating civil war broke out amongst the Greeks, also known as the Peloponnesian War. The path to peace was reputedly disrupted by invisible hands, with fleeting periods of ceasefire often requiring Persian mediation. Each time a Greek faction neared victory, Persians operating from the shadows would provide the weakened side with gold, perpetuating the internal strife. The Greeks' dependence on Persian gold and mediation increased, leaving the city-states divided and weakened. The Persian oligarchy leveraged their time-honored strategy of divide and conquer, manipulating alliances and utilizing their oracle's prophecies to disrupt settlements and offset any military advantage. Over 27 years, this enduring conflict brought Greek civilization to the brink of collapse. During this civil war, Athens was in a state of flux. Solon's republic was evolving into a more direct form of democracy, and this era saw the rise of demagogues and sophists. These sophists were masters of rhetoric and persuasion, teaching the young Athenians not to seek truth or consensus, but victory at any cost. Against this wave stood the figure of Socrates, who roamed Athens, challenging citizens to question their beliefs and to foster an environment of critical thinking and reasoned debate. Socrates' confrontations with the prominent sophists like Gorgias, Thrasymachus, and Protagoras are immortalized in the writings of his most illustrious pupil, Plato. These sophists propagated a worldview in which morality was subjective, shifting according to circumstance. They saw the wise man as one who discarded the notion of a universal moral law, prioritizing survival over virtue. The societal consequences of these teachings were profound. They introduced an element of moral relativity and skepticism into Athenian society that threatened to undermine its social fabric. They encouraged self-interest, opportunism, and a disregard for truth and justice, leading to internal instability and conflict. This period, often termed the Golden Age of Pericles, was in reality fraught with societal tension and strife. Against this backdrop of moral and societal crisis, Plato, Socrates' most distinguished student, emerged. He took upon himself the monumental task of confronting this social erosion, a challenge that would become his life's work and ultimately shape Western philosophy as we know it today. The stage was set for a clash of ideas, a struggle for the soul of a civilization. The year is 424 BC. Athens is at war with Sparta. It is the 25th year of the Peloponnesian War, which had brought an unending veil of tension over the city. Early morning light shimmered over the city, casting long shadows through the richly adorned home of Plato. The young man, on the cusp of his 20s, had been observing the sunrise from his window, his gaze fixed on the serene Athenian landscape, a stark contrast to the turmoil consuming his homeland. Caught in his thoughts, he contemplated the inherent beauty of nature and how it could exist side by side with the chaos of human conflicts. He found himself torn between the pull of this physical world, with its chaos and injustices, and the allure of an ideal world of the perfect beauty his mind could envision.
Good morning, Plato.
Good morning, Mother. Hello, Uncle Critias. What brings you to our house this early?
I'm here to see how my sister and nephew are faring. You're always in my thoughts, Plato. How are you?
In a month from now, it will be 2 years since the end of my military training, which means I can be sent to campaigns outside of Attica.
I will ensure you're not thrown into battle, Plato. You are of noble lineage. You are destined for the political sphere, not to be sacrificed in some random battle. You are meant to lead, not to be a foot soldier.
The great leaders of the past fought alongside their men, Themistocles, Miltiades, even Alcibiades.
Those are tales we spin for the masses. Real wars are won by strategy and gold, not by valor.
I believe it is the collective ethos of the citizens that will determine our supremacy. Our lack of it is why we are trapped in this war since before I was born.
Idealistic as always, nephew. Morals are a social construct that philosophers like to discuss but rarely practice. The real world does not function on ideals. It is the strength of the state and its laws that keep order, not notions of virtue.
Plato, remember, war or not, life goes on. You mustn't burden yourself so much with the city's troubles. You're surrounded by young women who admire you. Enjoy life a bit. You're spending too much time with your studies.
And what about your tutor? Are you still planning to study with that poet?
I believe there's wisdom to be gained from poetry. It could help inspire virtue.
Virtue won't fill your coffers or elevate your status, Plato. You need a teacher who will provide you with practical knowledge. Power, wealth, these are the tools of the influential.
I am off to wrestling practice. The Delphian Games are next week. Have a nice day.
He's strong-willed, like his father used to be. But strength alone doesn't make a great leader. He needs a wise teacher to channel his ideas, broaden his horizon.
He seems to be toying with the idea of becoming a poet. He believes he can stir hearts and minds with lyrical words. I suppose it's the influence of the popular Greek plays.
Poetry has its place, but it cannot shape states and command armies. Plato needs a teacher who can expose him to the harsh realities of the world, not romantic notions. He needs to learn about strategy, politics.
And who would that be, brother? The city is filled with sophists claiming to impart wisdom for the right price. Let's pray for the best.
Gymnasiums in ancient Athens were more than just places for physical exercise. They were an integral part of the society, where young men not only honed their bodies in the pursuit of athletic excellence, but also their minds. The gymnasium was a hub of social activity, a place to gather, converse, and debate. Plato's wrestling practice has just finished after he won against an easy opponent. Xenophon, his best friend, approaches, clapping his friend on the back.
Well done, Plato. You had him from the start. Did you just let him win a round so that he wouldn't feel too bad?
No, Xenophon, I simply believe in giving everyone a fair chance to lose.
Did you see the way his legs wobbled? I thought he was doing a dance routine, not wrestling.
Did you know wrestling is just an excuse for us to have philosophical discussions in skimpy attire?
Well, I'm just relieved you didn't instigate a philosophical discourse mid-wrestle. Hey, I just read this yesterday. Did you know that there was a war between Sparta and Messenia like 300 years ago, called the First Messenian War?
Of course, there was.
Well, when things were getting intense, both sides decided to settle the war with a mini-battle. Kinda like a duel, but instead they each chose their best 300 warriors, and it was like a make-or-break moment. In the end, the Spartans came out on top, and the Messenians had to submit to them for a long time. Talk about an epic showdown, right?
Imagine if wars were resolved through wrestling matches instead of battles.
The Spartans would still beat our asses. That's probably why wrestling is the only sport they're barred from in the Olympic Games.
They are forbidden because their wrestling style has resulted in fatalities in the past. It's uncivilized.
Perhaps we should adopt a touch of that uncivilized nature. You should have seen your face. Look, sophists are here once again. They come to the gymnasium every day.
They come to show their wit to the youth to get their parents to hire them as teachers.
Oh, look, it's Socrates. This is going to be fun. Let's go and listen.
Who's Socrates?
Oh, you're in for a big surprise, my friend.
Two sophists are standing in the center, and a lot of young men forming a circle around them, listening with intrigue. Socrates has appeared. He is standing on the side. His presence has made them uncomfortable, yet their arrogance is unbreakable. The presence of Socrates is something magnificent and monstrous. His gaze is not merely threatening or ironic. It is not solely captivating. His gaze is paradoxical, atopon, unusual and peculiar. He is accustomed to scrutinizing others with wide-open eyes, casting swift glances with his head lowered like a bull, ready to make his charge.
All things are relative. What's true for you might not be true for me.
Exactly. And since all things are relative, there's no such thing as absolute truth or virtue. It all depends on the individual and the situation.
Gentlemen, if I may interject, if all things are indeed relative, then isn't the statement, all things are relative, a relative statement itself?
Well, yes, Socrates, I suppose it is.
Then it's not absolutely true that all things are relative. There could be some things that are absolute, and if that's the case, then your argument falls apart.
But Socrates, we're simply saying that truth and virtue can vary from person to person.
And yet, don't we all recognize the same basic virtues? Courage, wisdom, justice, temperance? If virtue were truly relative, wouldn't we each have our own unique virtues, as unique as our faces? However, I've yet to meet a man who believes cowardice to be a virtue.
Well, when you put it that way...
It seems to me that while our understanding and application of virtue can vary, the virtues themselves are universal. They are not relative, but fixed and constant.
But Socrates, isn't it possible that what you consider virtuous, I might consider vice? For example, you might value humility, but I might see it as a lack of confidence.
Ah, a clever point. But tell me, do you not agree that both humility and confidence, when used appropriately, contribute to a well-lived life?
Well, when you put it that way...
And isn't knowing when to be humble and when to be confident a form of wisdom? And isn't wisdom a virtue?
I suppose so, but...
So by your own argument, you've agreed that wisdom is a universal virtue. And if wisdom is a virtue, and all virtues are wisdom, then all virtues are one and the same.
Wait a minute, Socrates. That's not fair.
Or perhaps, gentlemen, your words were twisted to begin with.
Well, I never...
Exactly, gentlemen. You never. And that's the problem with sophistry. It's all talk and no substance. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with a bowl of hemlock soup.
But Socrates, hemlock is poisonous.
Ah, but that's just your relative perspective. Maybe for me, it's a refreshing beverage.
The crowds laugh, and Socrates leaves with slow, calm steps. For Plato, Socrates' words start to fade in memory, but his gaze remains unforgettable. Yet difficult to describe, it could not be otherwise. The unique gaze that can change a life has already started to change Plato. Encountering Socrates alters you in ways unimaginable. The sun was already dipping beneath the skyline, casting long shadows upon the cobblestone streets of Athens, where the soft golden glow of oil lamps was just beginning to emerge. A secluded corner of the city hummed with lively conversation and thought-provoking discourse. An important symposium was taking place. The host of this gathering is Anytus, a prominent politician of Athens. His gatherings attracted scholars, artists, and philosophers who were now convened under the star-studded blanket of the Athenian night, on a rooftop with a panoramic view of the city. Anytus's distinguished guest tonight is Meno, a guest of honor introduced as the guest friend of the great king, a euphemistic term for a Persian agent. Under the rich drapes of his Persian attire, Meno bore an aura of mystery. The antithesis is sitting right next to him, Socrates, barefoot, draped in nothing more than a rough cloth. How did he manage to get into this symposium? He is poor, yet the wealthiest consider it a privilege to be amongst them. So old yet so exciting, so scoffing, contrarian and ironic, yet so pleasant and wanted, so ugly yet so beautiful.
Socrates, can virtue be taught?
If virtue can be taught, Meno, then there must be teachers of virtue. But alas, they are nowhere to be found.
Perhaps virtue is something that is acquired by practice.
But then why are some people who practice virtue not virtuous?
Perhaps virtue is something that comes by nature.
But then why are some people who are naturally gifted not virtuous?
I don't know.
Perhaps virtue is a combination of nature and practice.
That's possible.
But then, how do we teach virtue?
I would have thought you knew.
Perhaps we can't teach virtue.
But then, how do we become virtuous?
Perhaps we are born with virtue, but we need to recollect it.
But how would we recollect virtue?
By being questioned by someone who knows what virtue is.
But how do we know who knows what virtue is?
We don't, but we can start by asking questions.
I see. So you are saying that virtue is like a square. We don't need to be taught what virtue is. We just need to be helped to recollect it.
That's right. Virtue is a form, and forms are eternal and unchanging. We all have the potential to know virtue, but we need to be helped to recollect it.
How do we do that?
We do that by asking questions. We ask questions about virtue, and we help people to answer those questions. We are helping them to remember what they already know.
But what about the politicians? They seem to be very good at teaching virtue.
The politicians, they are the last people I would go to for advice on virtue. They are only interested in power and self-promotion. They do not care about virtue.
But they are the ones who make the laws. They are the ones who decide what is virtuous and what is not.
The laws are not made by the politicians. The laws are made by the people. The politicians only enforce the laws.
But the politicians are the ones who interpret the laws. They are the ones who decide how the laws should be applied.
The politicians may interpret the laws, but they do not have the final say.
Be careful, Socrates. If you continue to speak like this, you can expect to come to grief.
Grief would not be appropriate for such a fun symposium you have hosted here, Anytus. But if it comes to that, then so be it. There are worse things than grief. Tell me, Meno, what do you think the relationship between Persia and Greece should look like?
I would hope for peace and coexistence.
And does this extend to the relationship between Athens and Sparta? Do you believe they should find peace?
A united Greece is certainly stronger.
But wouldn't a united Greece be a threat to Persia?
Well,
Or perhaps a united Greece under Persian influence would be beneficial to your king, don't you think?
Socrates, you're mistaken. I only wish for peace.
Ah, peace. But peace at what cost and under whose terms? The great king's, maybe?
Watch your words, Socrates.
Anytus, I am like the horsefly who bites the brave and sluggish horse, that is Athens. Don't blame me for my nature.
But why, Socrates? What is your goal?
To awaken consciousness, to reveal what's hidden, even if it's hidden from oneself.
So, you pretend to have casual dialogues, but yet you have subversive goals?
Only an expert in subversion would be able to detect this.
But Socrates, how can you adopt such a mission when it is you who has famously said that all you know is that you don't know anything?
I don't know anything for certain, but with dialectic I can detect and bring onto the surface the lies of myself and of others, Meno.
Something like the phrase, know thyself, which is inscribed at the Temple of Delphi. This oracle has enlightened and helped Greece so much.
The phrase is conceived by Apollo. He is the one who enlightens. The rest of us seek his wisdom. Some use it nobly, and others not so much. But don't forget, Meno, Apollo is not the only god that Athens loves. We have the prudent Athena, whom we honor by adopting her name for our own city. She is the goddess of strategy. She stands guard over the city. Her vigilant owl sees all. That takes place in the dark. And speaking of dark, it appears it's time for me to return home.
Why the trepidation, Socrates? Afraid of your wife?
Meno, if you think my questions are tough, you should try spending an evening answering hers.
At the other side of the city, another symposium is underway, one where the wine flows more freely and the attendees are decades younger. Plato and other young men of the big families of Athens have gathered. The discussions involve the current state of the war. Xenophon, who loves history, recounts the glory days of the Persian wars, where Greeks were united with a common purpose. The conversation shifts to politics, where so many of the young men have an opinion and openly talk of their aspiration to become politicians themselves. Plato is silent and observant, troubled. The evening deepens, and all have drank more than usual. Dion, one of Plato's friends, noticing Plato's pensive mood, nudges him.
Plato, we need to shake off these thoughts. Come, let's visit the house of Rhodopis. There you might find a different perspective.
Despite initial hesitation, Plato follows Dion into the renowned house of Rhodopis, one of the most exquisite brothels of Athens. They enter a luxuriously adorned room where laughter and soft, melodious music fill the air. As they settle, a strikingly beautiful and young hetaira named Acantha approaches Plato. Her long dark hair fell over her shoulders, and her eyes, as blue as the Aegean Sea, had a mischievous glint.
Hello, young man. What is your name?
My friends call me Plato.
Plato means wide. That is not a real name, but I can see why they call you that. You are indeed very wide. Let me guess, you're a wrestler.
I am, but it is not the width of my shoulders, but the breadth of my ideas that gained me this name.
Aha, a philosopher.
And what is your name?
My name is Acantha. Tell me, Plato, what do you philosophers say about love and desire?
Love and desire are like two sides of the same coin. Love, or eros, as we call it, is the appreciation of beauty in its purest form, not just physical, but of the soul, of knowledge, and of the good. Desire, on the other hand, can be a powerful motivator or a destructive force.
And what do you desire, Plato?
Truth, wisdom, a better Athens, an end to this war.
Look around you. The laughter, the music, the shared stories. Life persists amidst chaos. War or not, life continues. Why so reserved, Plato? Even Apollo himself had to yield to Dionysus, the god of light and order, surrendering to the god of wine, pleasure and madness. Even the gods acknowledge that we need both order and chaos in our lives. Dionysus comes and goes and regenerates. Life is not all wisdom and virtue. It's also joy, ecstasy, and pleasure. Do you know why the gods are always depicted as young?
I presume it is to symbolize their immortality.
Youth is the ideal version of life. It overflows with energy, but also vanishes in the blink of an eye. What if the gods are always shown as young to remind us of the power of the present, the fleeting nature of our mortal lives? Youth embodies the spirit of living in the moment, of embracing joy and pleasure along with wisdom and virtue. Come, let me show you.
Her eyes inviting him into a world he was yet to explore. As Plato steps out into the quiet Athenian night, he feels renewed, and perhaps with a deeper understanding of the complexity of human nature. It is deep into the night, and Plato is walking back to his house. As he strolls down the labyrinth of silent stone-paved roads, his thoughts are a whirlpool, tossing and turning in the tidal pull of introspection. As Plato walks down an empty alley, a silhouette of a man flickers into his view. He is holding a staff and walking towards his direction. They are about to cross each other's path, as two solitary ships passing in the vast ocean of the Athenian night. Suddenly, the stranger's staff strikes the ground, barring Plato's path. With a jolt of surprise, Plato looks closely. It's Socrates.
Where do they sell fish?
In the market?
And marble?
In the quarry.
And armor?
The blacksmiths.
And where are men made good and virtuous?
I don't know.
Follow me.
A few days later, the Pythian Games hosted by the Temple of Delphi are in full swing. The grandeur of Delphi is awe-inspiring, an oasis where trees and marble blend seamlessly. The ornate temples, the tall statues, the imposing amphitheatre. At the heart of it all lies the Temple of Apollo, a marvel of architecture and the spiritual nucleus of the Games. The city, mystical and sacred, seems to pulsate with the energy of thousands of spectators and athletes who have gathered to honor the sun god Apollo. The glorious spectacle unfolds: chariot races, musical contests, and poetry readings. Yet, the wrestling matches hold a unique place in the Games. The revered sport of pankration, a fusion of wrestling and boxing, was more than a physical contest in ancient Greece. It was an embodiment of strength, strategy, and honor, an expression of the Greek ethos. This physical dialogue was not just an enactment of tradition, but a homage to the Greek spirit, reflecting virtues of discipline, courage, and the quest for arete, excellence in all aspects of life. Each victory echoed beyond personal triumph, resonating with the indomitable ethos of Greece itself. Plato has reached the finals of the wrestling matches, and he is determined to win. His opponent is a seasoned wrestler from Corinth, but Plato is confident in his own abilities. He has trained hard for this moment, and he knows that he has what it takes to be victorious. The match is fierce, with both wrestlers giving it their all. Plato is pushed to his limits, but he refuses to give up. He knows that this is his chance to make a name for himself, and he is not going to let it slip away. In the end, Plato emerges victorious. The crowd erupts in deafening applause, their cheers resounding in Plato's ears. He has won, a testament to his physical strength and honed technique. It is a moment of personal glory. As the festivities of the day simmer down, the moon ascends in the mystical Delphi sky. As the jubilation of the Pythian games subsided and the crowds dispersed into the cool night, Plato is walking alone, making his way back to his lodging. All of a sudden, a silhouette detached itself from the shadows and moved towards him. Cloaked in a dark robe, the figure carried an aura of mystery and authority. The silver insignia of the Delphic temple glinted in the moonlight, betraying his identity. He was a priest from the grand temple of Apollo. The priest approached Plato, his eyes inscrutable under his hood.
Victory suits you, young Plato. The laurel wreath, a fitting crown for both a philosopher and a wrestler. Delphi has seen many a philosopher and warrior grace her lands, but few as promising as you. Your lineage, your intellect, they set you apart.
Who are you, wise man? How do you come to know so much about me?
You may call me Pyrrhus. I've been a guardian of this temple since before you were born, Plato. And as for knowing about you, Delphi has a way of revealing what is hidden. Delphi seeks men of influence, Plato. Men who not only contemplate the world, but shape it. The common people, they yearn for direction. Left to their own devices, they're like an untrained horse, wild and aimless. They require an authority, a stern hand, to guide them on the right path. You carry a destiny, young Athenian. The wheels of time are already at work.
And what is his destiny?
In the realm of prophecy, the future is but a riddle. It is the shape of things to come, not the picture in full. Just as the Pythia sees, not the future, but the shape of things to be, so do I see a similar pattern in you. You will bear witness to great change, and your words will echo through eternity. Remember, young thinker, the river of destiny is tumultuous and deep. To navigate its currents, one needs more than mere courage. One requires wise companions and the divine grace of Apollo.
I understand.
We've heard tell of your new mentor, a man of intriguing reputation. There's a certain disappointment that colors our perception of Socrates. The oracle deemed him the wisest, yet his actions often reflect a willful defiance of our social norms.
I believe he is providing a counterbalance to the chaos.
Has it ever crossed your mind that Socrates, in his unrestrained pursuit of wisdom, might have drifted from the divine? That he may have forgotten the sanctity that ties us to Apollo and our time-honored traditions? You, however, will be the judge of that. The wisdom of Apollo is reserved for the chosen few, but you are deemed worthy to receive it. Always remember, this temple stands open for you to access the sacred wisdom. A storm is gathering over Athens, a storm the likes of which she has never faced. You will be called upon to aid her, should you need assistance. Remember that you have allies here.
With a final mysterious glance, the priest stepped back, his form merging with the shadows once again. Plato finds himself atop the towering cliffs of Delphi, overlooking the sacred Castalian spring that reflects the silver glow of the moon. The night breeze carries the scent of the olive trees and the distant lapping waves of the Corinthian Gulf. He is alone. He shelved the priest's words in the recesses of his mind, turning his attention instead to the starlit expanse of the night sky, inviting a quieter contemplation. It's a serene moment, offering him space to ponder on the experiences he's had. He's seen the decay of his beloved Athens, the rise and fall of demagogues, the manipulations of sophists, and the political machinations that threaten to erode the soul of his city. And yet, he also sees the potential for change. A single thought resonates within his mind, echoing through the stillness of the night. I can bring about change. Socrates' teachings echoed in his mind. The significance of self-examination, the pursuit of virtue, the fragile nature of our perceived wisdom. He wondered if his ambitions were his own or implanted on him by his family and society. And if stripped of them, what would be left? The thought scared him. Plato pondered on the challenging nature of truth. It demanded bravery, a readiness to confront one's misconceptions, to discover unsettling aspects of oneself, and the resolve to enact the necessary changes. He now understood that his previous perceptions were merely shadows of reality, holding some truth, but largely distorted. If these misconceptions were indeed analogous to shadows, then who would cast them? Himself or someone else? He wondered. And by what light? Who wielded the torch? How did they maintain control to prevent the shadows from dissipating, or the sun from rising and revealing the truth? Whatever these forces are, the effectiveness of their illusion could only be maintained if they confined him in a cave, chaining him down and compelling him to gaze in one direction while they manipulated the torchlight. Shaking off the dark thoughts, he recognized Socrates and his teachings as the beacon leading him out of whatever this metaphorical cave was, and into the illuminating light of wisdom and truth. Continuing his thoughts, he came to accept that many of his city's pathologies lay in him as well. The blind hope, the arrogant ambition. He understood that if he wanted to change his city, he would first have to change these traits within him. He came to realize that his inspiring vision of a great Athens was so beautiful that it was actually blinding him. It was hypnotizing and petrifying at the same time, making him unable to figure out a concrete starting point. He had to focus on attainable goals while still maintaining contact with the ideal. Plato realized that this was a journey he couldn't walk alone. He would need his friends, his fellow Athenians, and most importantly, he would need to gain discipline to resist temptations, the patience to endure trials, and the wisdom to learn from them. He could not let his ambition blind him like Icarus, and above all, he would need the help of God. He pondered on the profound love and respect Socrates held for each individual. It became clear that change wouldn't be born from grand strategies or state verdicts, but rather from the cultivation of individual potential. For the people are not nameless and dispensable parts of the city, but intricate beings graced with an innate capacity to create, to love, to find humor in the mundane, and engage in the fellowship of kindred spirits. Truly a divine gift from Zeus. He thought that they were the soul of the city, not to be subdued but uplifted. Every individual held an uncharted ocean of potential, a divine spark waiting to be kindled. They possessed the ability to harmonize with godly wisdom and to appreciate the nuances of aesthetic and moral beauty. Could it be, Plato wondered, that education might serve not to indoctrinate, but to ignite that divine spark within each person? His gaze turned heavenward, where the constellations danced in the infinite expanse of celestial beauty. He remembered the Pythagoreans, how they believed the universe operated on harmonious mathematical principles, an interplay of order and chaos. It dawned upon him that his vision was not merely a logical endeavor. It was an exploration of the spiritual and the divine. It was an ambitious attempt to harmonize the mortal realm with the wisdom of the gods. He imagined a society founded on justice, guided by wisdom, and inspired by virtue. And in this aspiration, he found a divine beauty. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of his vision, Plato turned to God. He found himself whispering a prayer into the night, seeking strength and guidance. He then slowly opened his eyes, realizing that this whole time an owl was staring right at him.